A Saturday without rain. In the suburbs west of St. Louis, Saturday smelled like coffee and damp grass. Simon sat on the porch, wearing gym shorts and holding a mug that said "World's Okayest Dad." He was trying to remember the last time a weekend had actually felt like rest. Inside the house, his wife was running the dryer, that dull, indifferent thump that filled every silence. Their son, Evan, was upstairs pretending to study but really scrolling through something endless. Their daughter was home from college, moving through the kitchen like a polite guest who no longer quite belonged there. Simon checked his phone. A group chat with coworkers was buzzing about a new corporate culture initiative, and the irony of reading about authentic connection while alone on a porch wasn't lost on him. He put the phone face down and watched a couple walking their golden retriever across the street. They looked content, which was irritating. He thought about mowing the lawn, about repainting the garage door, about the 1,000 small acts of suburban maintenance that passed for meaning. He'd once imagined he'd be something else by this age. A novelist, maybe, or a man who owned fewer coffee mugs with jokes on them. His wife came out, handed him a folded towel still warm from the dryer, and said, "You could help, you know." He nodded. "I could." The couple with the dog waved. He waved back. Somewhere down the block, a leaf blower started, that mechanical sigh of every American Saturday. Simon closed his eyes and told himself this was peace. It almost was. Part 2. The daughter Mara sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through the photos she hadn't posted. They all looked like they belonged to someone else. Girls on rooftops, golden hour smiles, boys pretending to laugh. College had felt like a fever dream, intense, bright, and already slipping away. Her mother was unloading the dishwasher with the sharp, efficient rhythm that said she was angry, but not enough to start a conversation. "Did you hear from your brother?" her mother asked. "He's upstairs," Mara said. "I meant, did you talk to him?" Mara gave a small laugh, dry and defensive. "We live in the same house, Mom. Talking feels redundant." Her mother sighed and shut the cabinet door a little too hard. The sound echoed. "You're different since you came back." "I'm just visiting," Mara said. That's exactly what I mean." For a moment they both looked toward the window, where Simon sat on the porch, motionless. The sight of him made Mara ache in a way she couldn't name. He looked misplaced, like he'd been left out there accidentally by time. She wanted to ask him about the things he used to love, the music, the books, the long drives with no destination. But he'd probably just say something like, "Those were different times." So she didn't. She just opened the fridge, poured herself some orange juice, and drank straight from the bottle. Her mother started to say something, but stopped. They both understood it wasn't really about juice. 3. The wife, Claire, never liked the word routine. It made her think of toothpaste commercials and women who gave up. But the truth was that she depended on it. The lists, the clean surfaces, the way folding towels could silence a thought. She watched Simon through the window. He was still on the porch, staring into the air like he expected meaning to drift toward him. Once, she'd found that introspection beautiful, his way of looking at the world, as if everything had a hidden moral. Now it just looked like absence. When they first bought this house, he'd promised her they'd never become those people. The ones who stayed married out of habit, who filled their weekends with errands instead of desire. She'd believed him then, but time had a way of sanding off conviction. From upstairs came the faint thud of Evan's music, something electronic and wordless. She thought of him as the family's quiet alarm. His distance was a signal, though no one seemed to hear it but her. Claire opened the refrigerator, saw the orange juice bottle on the counter, half empty and unwashed, and felt a quick, senseless flash of anger. She wanted to call out Mara's name, to say something sharp, something that would break through the polite fog that had settled over their house. But she didn't. Instead, she went to the sink, turned on the water, and let it run over her hands until the heat almost hurt. Outside, Simon lifted his mug in a vague wave at a neighbor passing by. Claire watched him for a moment longer, then closed the curtain. Part 4. The collision. By late afternoon, the air had thickened, that strange suburban humidity that made everything feel both heavy and unfinished. The dryer had stopped, the music upstairs had quieted, and the house seemed to be holding its breath. Simon came inside. The floor creaked under his bare feet. "We should grill something," he said. "It's nice out." Claire looked up from her phone. "We don't have anything to grill." "I'll go to the store." "It's already 5. "So?" Mara, still at the counter, said without looking up, "You guys always do this." Simon frowned. "Do what?" "Pretend you care about dinner so you don't have to talk about anything real." That landed harder than she meant it to. Claire's face tightened. Simon exhaled through his nose, a sound that was half laugh, half defeat. Evan appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up, wearing headphones around his neck like armor. "Can we not fight? It's Saturday." "We're not fighting," Claire said automatically. "Yeah," Mara said. "That's the problem." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Simon looked at each of them, his daughter's defiance, his son's retreat, his wife's exhaustion, and felt the absurd impulse to apologize for the whole architecture of their lives. The mortgage, the driveway, the way they'd traded uncertainty for comfort, and ended up with neither. "I'll just order something," he said finally. No one answered. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler ticked in perfect rhythm, watering a lawn that didn't need it. Inside, they stood in the half-light. A family paused between words, waiting for someone to say the thing that would make them real again. Part 5. Epilogue. Later, that night after dinner, takeout, eaten in silence. The house settled into its usual truce. Evan went back upstairs, disappearing into the blue light of his screen. Mara sat outside with her phone, wrapped in a hoodie that wasn't hers. Claire loaded the dishwasher. Simon stood beside her, handing over the plates like they were negotiating peace. "Do you ever feel," she said softly, not looking at him, "like we built this life and then forgot why?" Simon hesitated. "Every day." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You used to make plans, remember?" "I remember thinking we had time." They stood there, the hum of the appliance between them, as if the machine was speaking for both. Outside, the sprinkler had stopped. The neighborhood was still, only the faint whir of air conditioning units and the distant bark of a dog. Mara's phone screen lit her face for a moment, then went dark. Simon stepped out onto the porch again, the boards warm under his feet. He looked at the sky. Low clouds, no stars. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and the neighbor's grill. For a second, he imagined getting in the car and driving until the roads narrowed, until there were no cul-de-sacs, no plan, just open space. Then Claire joined him. She didn't say anything, just leaned against the railing beside him. Their arms didn't touch, but they were close enough that he could feel her warmth, like a memory returning. After a long minute, she said, Maybe tomorrow we go somewhere, just drive, no plan. He nodded. Yeah, maybe. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something that looked enough like it to keep them standing there. Two people not yet finished, listening to the quiet suburbs hum around them. Part 6. The next morning. It rained after all, sometime around dawn. A slow, polite rain that didn't bother to wake anyone, just softened the edges of everything. Claire woke first. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the drip from the gutter outside their bedroom window. She stood for a long time by the glass, watching the street turn slick and dark. Downstairs, Simon was already making coffee. The smell filled the house, warm, almost forgiving. When she came into the kitchen, he looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to appear at all. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, poured her a cup. For a while they just stood there. Two people who had shared decades and still didn't quite know how to begin a morning together. "I thought we could still drive," she said finally, "even if it's raining." He smiled, small, hesitant. "Yeah, I'd like that." Mara came down in a sweatshirt, hair unbrushed, eyes half awake. Evan followed a few minutes later, carrying his phone like a passport. "We're going somewhere?" he asked. "Just a drive," Simon said. "Nowhere special." "Cool," Evan said, in the flat, non-committal tone of a 17-year-old who secretly doesn't mind. They got in the car, the four of them, and for the first time in a long time, there was no background noise. No playlist, no news, no chatter. Just the sound of the tires on wet pavement. They drove past identical lawns, through small towns that hadn't changed in 20 years, through the slow drizzle that blurred the billboards and the past alike. No one said much. But every mile seemed to loosen something. Not resolve it, just loosen it. At one point, Claire reached over and turned off the wipers. The silence deepened. Simon looked at her and smiled, just slightly. Outside, the rain slowed. For the first time in a long while, the family didn't feel like a problem to be solved. They were simply there, moving forward, together, through the wet light of an ordinary Sunday. 6. The next morning. It rained after all, sometime around dawn. A slow, polite rain that didn't bother to wake anyone, just softened the edges of everything. Claire woke first. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the drip from the gutter outside their bedroom window. She stood for a long time by the glass, watching the street turn slick and dark. Downstairs, Simon was already making coffee. The smell filled the house, warm, almost forgiving. When she came into the kitchen, he looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to appear at all. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded, poured her a cup. For a while, they just stood there. Two people who had shared decades and still didn't quite know how to begin a morning together. "I thought we could still drive," she said finally, "even if it's raining." He smiled, small, hesitant. "Yeah, I'd like that." Mara came down in a sweatshirt, hair unbrushed, eyes half awake. Evan followed a few minutes later, carrying his phone like a passport. "We're going somewhere?" he asked. "Just a drive," Simon said. "Nowhere special." "Cool," Evan said, in the flat, non-committal tone of a 17-year-old who secretly doesn't mind. They got in the car, the four of them, and for the first time in a long time, there was no background noise. No playlist, no news, no chatter. Just the sound of the tires on wet pavement. They drove past identical lawns, through small towns that hadn't changed in 20 years, through the slow drizzle that blurred the billboards and the past alike. No one said much, but every mile seemed to loosen something. Not resolve it, just loosen it. At one point, Claire reached over and turned off the wipers. The silence deepened. Simon looked at her and smiled, just slightly. Outside, the rain slowed. For the first time in a long while, the family didn't feel like a problem to be solved. They were simply there, moving forward, together, through the wet light of an ordinary Sunday. Part 7. The drive. The highway unwound in long gray ribbons. The rain had thinned to mist, the kind that blurred the world just enough to make it look merciful. Simon drove without music, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. The kids were half asleep in the back seat. Mara had her forehead against the window, tracing the condensation with her finger. Evan was wearing headphones but not actually listening to anything. Claire watched the landscape slide by. Gas stations, empty fields, the tired backs of strip malls. It was ugly and familiar, and for some reason, she loved it. It felt real. They stopped at a diner off Route 94. It was the kind of place where the waitress calls everyone Han, and the menu hasn't changed since the Reagan years. The windows were fogged. The air smelled of coffee and fry oil. They sat in a booth by the window. Nobody spoke for a while. The waitress poured coffee without asking, and Claire smiled a quiet thanks. Finally, Mara said, "It's weird. When I was little, I thought these trips were the best thing in the world." Simon looked up. "They kind of were," she shrugged. "Maybe." Evan stirred his chocolate milk with a straw. "I don't really remember." "You were a baby," Claire said. "You slept through most of it." "Guess I'm still doing that," he said, not quite smiling. For a moment, all four of them laughed, softly, awkwardly, but together. Simon leaned back, looking at them. "You know," he said, "it doesn't have to be this hard. Any of it." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He paused, searching. "I mean, maybe this is it. Maybe this—" He gestured at the booth, the coffee, the rain outside. "Is the good part. We just keep waiting for something else, and it's been this all along." No one answered right away. Outside, a truck passed, sending up a wave of dirty water. Mara watched it ripple down the glass. "Maybe," she said. The waitress brought pancakes. The family started eating. The world, for once, didn't seem to demand anything more from them. Part 8. Evan back home. Evan went straight upstairs. His parents thought he was tired, and maybe he was. But mostly he just needed the door between them. He lay on his bed, phone in hand, scrolling without reading. The same videos, the same half-faces, the same loop of jokes pretending to mean something. It all moved so fast it didn't have to hurt. Downstairs, he could hear the faint murmur of his parents talking, the clink of dishes. It was oddly comforting, like the ocean through a window. He thought about the diner, the smell of coffee, the rain sliding down the window, his dad saying maybe this is the good part. It had sounded corny at the time, but now it replayed in his head with a strange weight. Maybe because nobody at school ever said things like that. Not out loud, anyway. He opened his notes app and typed a few words, almost without thinking. "We keep waiting for something else." Then deleted it. From the hallway came Mara's voice, low, laughing into her phone. A college friend, probably. He didn't understand how she could move so easily between worlds. When she was gone, the house felt smaller. When she was home, it felt like she'd outgrown it. He turned off his phone and stared at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the glow from the streetlight filtering through the blinds. He thought about how everything, the rain, the silence, his family sitting in that diner, felt like it was trying to tell him something just out of reach. He didn't know what it was yet. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to. Part 9. The next morning, Evan. The morning light came in pale and cold through the blinds, cutting the room into neat rectangles. Evan woke early, though he couldn't say why. The house was still, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone's asleep and nothing has gone wrong yet. He sat up and looked at his desk. The notes from last semester were still there, curled at the edges, a small graveyard of unfinished effort. His phone buzzed once, a group text from friends planning something stupid for the weekend. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled on a sweatshirt and went outside. The air smelled like wet leaves and gasoline. The street was empty except for a jogger and a couple of sprinklers ticking in unison, that suburban metronome of control. He walked down to the end of the block, where the road dipped toward the small retention pond that passed for a lake. The water was still. A few ducks floated near the edge, indifferent. For a moment he thought about the drive yesterday, the diner, the way his parents had looked at each other, the strange quiet that hadn't felt heavy for once. It wasn't that anything had changed. It was just that he'd noticed. He picked up a small stone and skipped it across the surface. 3 skips, then silence. Behind him a car started, his father's. The sound of the engine came soft through the morning mist. Evan turned, half expecting to be called back. But Simon only waved from the driver's seat before backing down the driveway. Evan stood there for a while longer, hands in his pockets, watching the ripples fade on the pond. The world looked simple in that moment, damp and colorless and wide open. He didn't know what he wanted yet, but for the first time, he had the faint sense that wanting was possible again. Part 10. Evan coming home. When Evan came back, the house smelled like toast and detergent, the kind of smell that meant Sunday had already begun without him. Mara was at the kitchen table, her hair tied up, laptop open, typing the way people do when they're not sure what they want to say. She looked up when he came in. "Morning," she said. "Hey, you go for a walk?" "Yeah, that's new. Guess I was bored." She smiled a little, real, not teasing. It startled him. For the first time in months, they didn't feel like two strangers sharing Wi-Fi. Their mom was by the sink, rinsing blueberries. She was humming, quietly, almost unaware of it. Something from the radio, probably. Evan watched her for a moment. How carefully she moved, how tired but deliberate she looked. She turned and caught him staring. "What?" she said, half smiling. "Nothing. You just look different." Claire laughed softly. "That's what happens when I sleep for once." It wasn't much, but something in her tone, light, unguarded, made him feel both safer and more unsure. Like hearing that adults, too, had days they were trying to survive. He poured cereal and sat across from Mara. She was still typing, but slower now. "Are you writing something?" he asked. "Trying to," she said. "It's an essay for class, about family." He grinned. "Good luck with that." She laughed. "Yeah, I know." Their dad came in through the garage, holding a paper bag of groceries. His hair was damp. He'd clearly gone for a drive. He dropped the bag on the counter, out of breath. "Got bagels," he said. "Figured we could use an upgrade from cereal." "Wow," Mara said. "Gourmet." Simon smiled, mock bowing. "Anything for my fans." Evan watched his parents move around each other, not exactly close, but careful, like two dancers relearning an old routine. And for the first time, he saw not the people who set the rules, but the ones still figuring them out. He thought of what his dad had said at the diner. Maybe this is the good part. And wondered if that was true. Maybe it wasn't about waiting for something to happen. Maybe it was about noticing that something already was. He didn't say it out loud. But when his mom handed him a warm bagel and smiled, he met her eyes and smiled back, small, almost shy. It was nothing dramatic, just a quiet moment in a kitchen on a gray Sunday morning. But for Evan, it felt like the beginning of something real. Part 11. A few weeks later. By late March, the air in the suburbs had changed. Warmer, restless, thick with the smell of thawing soil and the early promise of spring. The weekends came and went the way they always had, but the house had a new texture now. Nothing dramatic, just lighter somehow, as if a door had been left open somewhere. Simon started running again. Not far, just loops around the neighborhood. Earbuds in, an old playlist from years ago that somehow still worked. He didn't tell anyone he was doing it, but Claire noticed. She noticed everything. She'd started reading again too. Paperbacks she used to love before the years got too busy. Sometimes she'd leave one face down on the couch, and Simon would pick it up, read a few pages, and pretend he hadn't. Mara called home more often from campus. The conversations were short. Laundry advice, a class complaint, a half-hearted miss you, but Claire saved every voicemail. She never said that out loud, but Evan knew. He'd seen the folder on her phone. Evan himself had started walking most mornings. Not far, just to the pond. Sometimes his dad joined him. They didn't talk much, just stood there, hands in pockets, watching the ducks come and go. It wasn't closeness exactly, but it wasn't distance either. One morning, as they stood side by side, Simon said quietly, "You know, I was thinking about that diner." Evan nodded. "Me too." "You remember what I said?" "Yeah," Evan said. "About this being the good part." Simon smiled, a little surprised. "Right." Evan hesitated, then said, "I think you were right." Simon looked at him, not as a father looks at a son, but as one person looks at another, when they realize something in common. Then he nodded. "Yeah, me too." They walked home without saying anything else. The sun had just started cutting through the clouds, and the wet pavement caught the light like a secret. Inside the house, Claire was making pancakes. She turned as they came in and said, "You're just in time." Evan grinned. "Guess we are." He didn't know when it had happened, when the house had stopped feeling like a collection of rooms and started feeling like a place again. But as the morning light spilled across the kitchen, he felt it. That small, ordinary grace of being together. Imperfect, but still intact. Part 12. The end of the season. By the time spring turned fully green, the days had grown louder. Lawn mowers, baseball games, the sound of sprinklers hitting fences. The neighborhood looked alive again, though most people still hid inside their screens. On a Sunday afternoon, the four of them found themselves in the backyard, almost by accident. Simon had dragged the grill out of the garage. Claire brought lemonade. Mara was home for the weekend, sprawled in a lawn chair pretending to read. Evan tossed a baseball into the air and caught it lazily. There was no plan, no special occasion, just weather too good to ignore. Simon flipped the burgers and said, mostly to himself, "Didn't think we'd ever use this thing again." Claire smiled. "Miracles happen." Mara smirked. Next, you'll tell me you're joining TikTok. God forbid, Simon said. They laughed, easy and unforced. It wasn't the laughter of a family healed, just one that had stopped holding its breath. After they ate, they stayed outside. The light had softened, turning the grass gold. Somewhere down the street, a radio played an old song none of them could name. Evan lay back on the lawn, watching the clouds drift. It's weird, he said quietly. How the same place can start to feel different, even if nothing changes. Claire looked at him. Maybe that's what change actually is. He thought about that. It sounded true in the small way truths sometimes do, obvious only after you've lived them. Mara closed her book. I miss this, she said, not looking at anyone in particular. Simon said, It's still here. The words hung there, neither sentimental nor simple, just true enough to hold on to. The sun slid behind the trees. The first fireflies blinked at the edge of the yard. Nobody moved for a while. For once, the quiet didn't mean distance. Epilogue. Later that night, when everyone had gone inside, Simon stood alone on the porch, the same place he'd sat that first Saturday. The mug was gone. The grass smelled sharper now. Through the window, he could see Claire turning off lights, Evan rinsing a glass, Mara scrolling on her phone, smiling at something unseen. He thought about how fragile everything still was, and how somehow that made it matter more. The world was the same. The family was the same. Only the silence had changed.